Alright, thank you for joining me, and thank you for being here to this little question and answer series. Been getting these going regularly now on a variety of topics, but this one is particularly special to my person. Here we are diving really into what movies mean to, me, but it would be great if we all dug a little more into why we like the things we like. So if you don't want to watch awesome potatoes, hopefully this is engaging and people will go through the questions themselves, either publicly in the comments or in private, in your own journals. Also, please just discuss what's going on in the video topic. We're here to talk and learn. That is the goal. And ideally all of that without being a big old bag of dicks. So, please and thank you.
How would you describe movies to someone who has never heard of the concept?
In its purest descriptor, pictures, but they move. Movies. In general, movies are considered to have a runtime of about 60 minutes, but when movies were just beginning, they ran much shorter. But I don't think a theater will accept anything that runs less than about 75 minutes now. Our movies are primarily a storytelling medium, but they're definitely more versatile than that, and they're definitely one of the most popular currently, generating billions of dollars globally. A movie can just be a series of pictures giving the illusion of motion, but by adding structure and music and dialogue and story and themes, filmmakers essentially try to manipulate you into feeling things as well as tell a moving story. Whether it be excitement and awe in a big action blockbuster, or terror and anxiety in a horror story. Grounded, real-world dramas are generally regarded as the most respected genre, but that is such a wide scope that they can range from anxiety-inducing crime dramas to romance tragedies. The most successful movies hit as many sectors as possible by injecting every descriptor imaginable, from action, romance, tragedy, suspense, fear, mixed together into something that you've hopefully not experienced before.
What are the earliest memories of movies you recall?
I definitely grew up with a storage ottoman crammed full of clamshell Disney VHS tapes. I have many fond memories of bad movies that I still find enjoyment in, like Batman and Robin and Pebble and the Penguin. 2 tapes I burnt out, if you remember that being an issue. In theaters, the earliest memory is not a fun one, but that is a story for a later question. The movie I was watching, though, was Toy Story 2. I wouldn't really grow a love for the motion picture industry as a whole, though, until I was, maybe 10 or 11. Between all of the hype of the Star Wars prequels and my familiarity with the original trilogy, I decided to get into all of the behind-the-scenes extras on the DVDs and the TV specials on the mythology baked into the franchise, and that was something that was super interesting to me. All that supplemental information about the movie-making process made something kind of click and recognize how important movies were as a storytelling medium to me, I think, if that makes sense, as well as how insane the movie-making process is just in general. From there, I experimented with franchises like Jaws and Indiana Jones, stuff I had heard about and kind of grown up with, but didn't really invest in. Those movies also helped me understand following directors and their filmographies, and I also discovered film critics and enthusiasts on the internet, and while I couldn't obtain every movie they talked about, I kept a list and watched everything I could find off that list. The first things I would order when I got on Amazon say something about who I was in 2011. I'd love to know what you think what that is.
Have you any experience in the motion picture industry?
Not a lot. More theater experience in high school. I interned at a production company in Cleveland for a few months before having to drop that because it was unpaid and me need food. So outside of being an uncredited gopher on Kevin Costner's draft day, I do not. During those few months, all I really ended up doing was sit in the production company's office most days. And when I was on set, I held a boom or quite literally stood there out of the way waiting for someone to tell me what to do on a commercial or a short video. It wasn't the best time. Was not awful, just kind of a nothing of an experience.
What are your favorite obscure movies?
I'm the one writing these questions, and this one still caught me off guard for some reason. I grabbed 10 movies from my collection I really like but don't think get talked about enough. Then I felt like that was too much for the kind of video we're doing here, so I tried to narrow it down to 5, but only got to 6. So here are a handful of movies I think qualify as obscure. The Boy and the Beast.
This is about the titular boy who falls into a fantastical realm full of animal spirits, training with the titular beast to become the greatest in the land and grappling with personal traumas.
With the exception of tie-in movies, nobody is calling Yu-Gi-Oh! A Ghibli, but I do remember The Boy and the Beast getting put up right beside Miyazaki for some reason, and I don't think it should be. I get similar vibes from The Boy and the Beast as I do in shonen stories. I get that same empowering feeling with its montages and almost ornamenty backdrop to all of this. This feels like the best I've ever had of that kind of story, especially when I saw it in theaters, but seeing it at home as well, it's still a great experience. The Americanization of Emily is an exceptionally rare anti-war World War II movie. Following Disney's Julie Andrews, a combat nurse and widow, along with a romance with Disney's James Gardner, a general's assistant. And I've never seen a motion picture with a stance like this, primarily pointing out the war profiteering that did not stop because there was a war going on, and was encouraged, and it also did a lot of arguing about the over-glorification of war and honor kind of forcing this perpetual cycle of conflict. It's also a really funny movie, with maybe my favorite Julie Andrews performance and definitely my favorite from James Gardner. Easily the newest on this little selection plate society. I don't know if my feed just hates quality original movies, since this would have flown entirely under my radar if a friend didn't offer me advance tickets because of scheduling conflict. But Polite Society follows a pair of British-Pakistani sisters, one an aspiring stunt actor, and the other is getting married, and gradually more insane points get added until we are in a full-fledged action thriller spy espionage-ish movie. This is fun, and it's really well shot, and does a lot of new things. These are things I like. Now, The Amusement Park, the legendary zombie director George A. Romero's long-lost horror movie. It was filmed in 1975, but shelved until 2019 when Shudder got the rights, with the help of Guillermo del Toro, because the original organization who paid to have Romero make it realized how fucked up his mind actually was when they saw the finished product. Talking about The Amusement Park's plot is a little hard because it's incredibly abstract. So please go into it expecting weird and off-kilter. It's about a really happy elderly gentleman being beaten down by society, represented by the amusement park, here until he is, utterly broken. The entire movie feels kind of like a dream, or like that we, the audience, are in limbo with this gentleman. I found it to be a genuinely unsettling hour-long PSA about growing old, which is still a certainty the last time I checked. I don't know what to say about Phase 4, because it's the story is, it's just about a couple of researchers studying ants that turn out to be super smart, but not so smart that we as the audience can understand them. It's such a unique premise that sold me instantly. It's really slow. I mean, really, really, really slow and methodical, and I think that's good and bad for its own reasons. It's more about the suspense of these people slowly understanding of how truly fucked they are. And the legacy, I don't think the legacy is good. It's as slow as Phase 4, but I'd say half as interesting. It's formulaic in its story about suspiciously successful people who find themselves dying in mysterious ways. Sam Elliott is here, having not yet fully reached his evolved form, but it's a movie that's also really important to my spouse, and their love for it was kind of infectious, and I can't help but genuinely enjoy this gothic paranormal mystery now.
Which movies do you revisit most often?
Right now I've been specifically pushing myself to watch new things, but the movies I revisit most often are the ones that are generally comfort movies for me. In what we watched last week, I talked about how Dragon Ball is a comfort franchise for me. As far as individual motion pictures go, though, Disney is a big go-to. Hunchback of Notre Dame and Wreck-It Ralph I might hit up the most. I'm also going to loop in Wall-E here, even though that was developed by Pixar. And broadly speaking, the Star Wars franchise, movies included, just about all of them, is often represented on my watch list. What about more sophisticated, or no, not sophisticated, that makes it sound like nothing listed above here has shades of depth to it at all, because there are less comforting movies to me that I rewatch most often. Orca, the Killer Whale, is one of them, and all of its melodic nothingness and voiced over dialogue. And Seven Samurai is a classic thing that I have on like once or twice a year. I think Everything Everywhere All at Once is going to join this list quickly enough. That had messages that hit me on just a personal level. I think the overlying theme really is the movies I watch more often than others are the movies I have a strong connection with. Something like Hunchback I came to love and were reintroduced to me at important times in my life. Others just read me like an open book. I don't think the movies I rewatch are necessarily the best movies. I feel that's like a weird metric to judge. There are a lot of movies that I love, that I see and think are fantastic, that I never want to fucking see again. But these hit home.
How do you feel about theaters?
Rewind to that, like, talking about theaters before. Fun story. My very first theater experience, or at least the one I can remember, Toy Story 2, would have been about 6. Now, we all know theater seats have those built-in cup holders. This was no different, but these were so old that the cup holders didn't have a bottom. The cups got so wide that they didn't need it. My genius self immediately shoved my hand into that hole and got it stuck. And I didn't complain until I had to pee about half an hour to an hour in the movie, and my aunt, who took me with my brother and cousin, nearly died of a heart attack. She got the whole theater to stop the movie, turned down the lights, and got the manager to butter the fuck up out of my hand until we pried my little mitt free. Never saw a movie theater have cup holders like that again, honestly. And for years I took credit like I was the court case that fixed that safety hazard, but God, that's so dumb to think. Last month I know I talked about concerts and how much I struggle with those sometimes. Theaters are generally the opposite experience, especially in the years since reclining chairs have become the invasive species and drove out the old classic folding theater seats. And not that those didn't have their appeal. Sitting in 1950s asbestos-ridden cushions have a specific vibe, if you know what I mean. Theaters give me a great experience, especially like opening night crowds. Spider-Man No Way Home is an entirely different experience with all the long silent pauses for the audience to cheer. It's like taking the laugh track out of a sitcom almost. But that doesn't make it the only experience. It's pretty clear that most movies are viewed from the comfort of their home at this point, streamed more than likely. On that, I don't think movie theaters are dying. That was a fear, I think, during COVID. But I think there's a bit of a cultural shift where less people can be bothered to get to the theaters. At least before streaming, you might be motivated to go to a theater because whenever it would be released on TV, it would certainly be heavily censored.
See what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps?
And it would both be cut down for time and extended because of commercial breaks somehow. Have you ever tried to watch The Great Escape with commercials? It's a 5-hour commitment that only like 15-year-old me was patient enough for. With streaming, nearly everything comes to the home market within about 4 months, more or less uncensored, until it goes away because of a tax write-off anyway.
Who are your top 5 directors?
Like the obscure movie selection, a few directors definitely fell out of the contention. I wanted to pick directors that both have a pretty large catalog and that I genuinely adore a large portion of their movies. Because of that, I think this little list came out a little more pedestrian, but I'm going to stand by it. So I'm sorry to Matt Reeves and Edgar Wright and Jordan Peele. All of you could be on this list another day. I will gladly give each of you a shine to spot in future videos.
James Whale.
You would recognize him as the director of Universal's first 2 Frankenstein pictures. James Whale did other horror classics like The Old Dark House and my favorite pre-MPAA monster movie, The Invisible Man. But he also did pioneering work in Hell's Angels and a pretty great adaptation of The Man in the Iron Mask. A lot of his earliest stuff is pretty readily available if you search with minimum difficulty. I find his movies are also a lot more quicker paced and snarkier than most of his contemporaries from the time. And I earnestly believe that Whale brought an energy to cinema that just about everyone would try to follow and emulate.
Akira Kurosawa.
I don't know what to tell you. Akira Kurosawa lives up to the hype. One of the Criterion commentaries for The Seven Samurai points out how openly Kurosawa tried to emulate the directing style of John Ford, which means Kurosawa ended up churning out a ton of unique Japanese stories, essentially tailor-made for a Western audience in a lot of ways. The aforementioned Seven Samurai is easily his most well-known movie, but I am partial to Throne of Blood, Kurosawa's adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth, as well as High and Low, which follows a company executive handling a hostage situation with his driver's son.
John Carpenter.
Going back over the entirety of John Carpenter's filmography, there are definitely movies I don't adore, but the ones I do, I'm borderline obsessed over. Redefining genres and pushing boundaries while never losing what makes John Carpenter John Carpenter. Even those movies we don't adore are at the very least interesting and are pushing new ideas out there consistently and with a bunch of energy.
Denis Villeneuve.
Denis Villeneuve has been knocking it out of the park for a while now, but I first came aware of his work with Prisoners during that initial release. And I would argue that Denis and someone like Christopher Nolan are the two directors that are most consistently putting out these really epic scale productions lately. And while Nolan is a little more hit or miss for me, everything Denis Villeneuve has put out since I've been following him has been such a smash hit for me. Dune is one of the biggest franchises out there right now, thanks to Denis carrying all the weight of Frank Herbert's fictional universe on his back.
Guillermo del Toro.
A high school partner introduced me to del Toro through Pan's Labyrinth, right when that DVD was being released. And while Pan's Labyrinth is still amazing, I felt it was a little avant-garde for del Toro to break into the mainstream at the time, and looking back at his early work, I would kind of stand by that. But del Toro has continued to pivot while keeping his identity in all of his pictures. Like, look at Pacific Rim and its sequels. Both are shooting the same kind of thing, but Pacific Rim is so unique to this day that it's not been replicated, even in its own universe. Something has just gone without del Toro's eye. Oh, and The Shape of Water is a monster sci-fi movie that won Best Picture, which we can argue is arbitrary, but that doesn't diminish the achievement for a horror, sci-fi, and fantasy romance story like this. When is the last time a monster movie won Best Picture? Like, Silence of the Lambs, maybe, you could argue? I also want to take this time to shout out to Dev Patel and Zelda Williams. Both had their first directorial debuts released this year, and I think both were great in their own ways, especially considering where they both are in their filmmaking careers.
How do you feel movies impact other artistic mediums?
I remember taking a class on the effects of pop culture, and the teacher, cannot remember his name for the life of me, described pop culture as this odd cycle where daily life influences art, and art influences culture, and culture influences daily life. Movies have become both prominent artistic staples as well as cultural milestones that fuel multiple industries and communities around the world. South Korea in recent decades fueled a significant amount of cash into their film industry, and now all we are talking about is Bong Joon-ho and Oldboy and Peninsula Zombies. And with good reasons, all are pretty phenomenal. Movies and the motion picture industry also, I would argue, acted as the primary storytelling medium for the mass audience for several generations, and might still be. It's probably that or video games, I'd guess, with the written word coming in third, but man, I'd love to be proven wrong. But so many people consume stories through movies and television. I grew up with friends who would rather watch a movie and skim Spark Notes than read The Great Gatsby. And there are stories that can only be told in cinema as cinema displays it. We can approximate Star Wars as a play, but we can never recreate it. But we oddly have home media as a thing, and that's become a thing that can almost help us relive it, which is also part of the popularity of it as a storytelling medium. We can relive these experiences. Also, back to experiences that only work in the movies. Can you imagine something like Oppenheimer as a video game? Sure, you have point-and-click games and plenty of text-based adventures that could tell an adaptation, but nothing could grab an audience in such a grand way.
If you could meet a director, living or dead, whom would it be?
Okay, do I get a translator? It would really suck to bring back someone like Kurosawa or Ishiro Honda back from the dead for a conversation just to not understand them. And last month I chose a living and unliving person, so I suppose we should do that again going forward. And for anything else like this, sure. For a director no longer on the living spectrum, I will again throw out James Whale. Not only to learn about his experiences making his movies, but his life in general. He's one of the few openly gay faces in Hollywood's early years. I also mentioned it earlier, but what James Whale brought, that unique energy, I really want to learn more about that. And as far as living directors go, it's going to be a real off-the-cuff choice here, but right now I'm going to say Andrea Romano. She's better known in the television industry, but she was a vocal director for dozens of animated movies as well, especially with Warner Brothers. I would credit Romano for the direction of a lot of the performances in series like the Avatar: The Last Airbender. She is the one, as far as I understood, that pushed to have things like the cast actually record against many industry standards.
What do movies mean to you?
So, I didn't necessarily grow up with a huge sense of community. Probably my fault. But it means I definitely dove into movies hard as an escape. Probably back when I was about 10, I remember renting all the Jaws VHS tapes from Hollywood Video down the road and going to school the next day and nobody understanding why I was excited for the old movies. That is a memory that really sticks out, but everyone's lack of interest didn't deter me. I just dove into motion pictures that much harder. It was around then I was also introduced to the Matrix movies, as well as film criticism as a whole, which is what opened me to so many more obscure productions and foreign films. It was also about this time that I remember being really disappointed for the first time by a movie in theaters, so thank you X-Men 3: The Last Stand for making me start to feel like a little critic myself in 8th grade. I've found that more often than not when it comes to movies, I like character and story. And if I find these two things consistent and interesting, I can forgive a lot of other faults in a production. And if those aren't there, a movie better stand out by being unashamed to be what it is, with caveats. Absolutely fuck you, Birth of a Nation. I don't care if it's good, but show me something I haven't seen before and show me something I think the filmmakers are proud of and are excited that they got to release. I don't love every Zack Snyder movie. I find his philosophy largely flawed and his style doesn't really strike my eye. I also think taking DC away from him is better for the brand in the long run, but I do absolutely respect the shit out of him as a filmmaker and as a person, and I will gladly continue to support everything he does. And I also agree and think slow-mo is really, really cool. But also, I think I got off track again. What do movies mean to me? Fuck this line of questioning me. Movies are storytelling and art and entertainment. It's a medium that can be utilized in an infinite amount of ways, and the one I most gravitate towards personally. I enjoy art museums and a quick walkthrough, and I understand the excitement of sports ball and all the community from being a fan of a team. And if a book is written in a way I can really vibe with it, I'll love it forever. But movies and motion pictures kind of do all of that for me at the same time, and more. It's a perfect way to make me engage, and I don't think I will ever stop being a movie guy because of that.
Upcoming episodes on and accepting questions for Disney, Netflix, DC Comics, Dragon Ball, horror, in the comments.